how many of you guys know anything about business? In case you do decide to go into a career in UX, I'm gonna kind of go over the things that you need to know because you are gonna be the liaison between the customers and the business, right? And so it's really important that you understand not just the customer side, which you will learn in school and on your own, and that's the main focus of your job as a designer. But you also need to know the business side because they're gonna be the ones who are making all of the decisions. So who's familiar with this website? All right, so this is Dribbble. This is where designers will go and put up their really creative, innovative designs. It's kind of like an online portfolio. If you go and check this out, this is really common for people to use this as a starting point to go and find inspiration, right? So if you're looking for like, hey, I need to do a fun checkout flow, or I need to do a fun landing page, and you're trying to find a different and creative way to approach it, or just get your creative juices flowing, you might start on a site like this. Right? Another one that you could also check out is Behance. That's also another place where people put up their art and their work, and you can go and find inspiration. But industry professionals actually don't really love these sources as the end-all be-all, right? It's a great starting point to go and just find inspiration. But the problem is that a lot of the designs that are on these kind of sites are not built with any sort of context, right? And what I mean by that is that they're not really solving a problem. And that's our whole job as a UX designer. So whose problems do you think we should be solving? Yeah, users, customers, same thing, right? Absolutely, that's our primary focus. But what about the business, right? They have their own problems, and 9 times out of 10, their problems are very different than the customer problems, right? So when you are in design mode and you get into a company and you start working, you not only have to solve for the customer, but you simultaneously have to solve for the business. As far as the primary concern, customer obviously is your focal point. But when you're talking to anyone on the business side, that's not their focal point. So you can kind of see how there might be a clash there. So today, what I'm gonna go over is 1, why designers struggle without business knowledge, things that normally happen in the workforce. 2, key business concepts that everyone should know, kind of regardless if you are business savvy or not. And then 3, how to ask the right questions so that you have the right amount of context. So let's start at the top. Designers are gonna get super excited about features, right? You get a feature and you're like, all right, let's go. I'm gonna go and knock this out, and you take it away and you go and do your thing. Except without context, you might fall into one of these 3 traps. And it's very common. We see it all the time, especially for our new green designers. And so that's why I'm bringing it to you today. One trap is misaligned priorities, right? You're prioritizing the design and trying to make sure that the user gets from point A to point B. However, the business is in a whole different field, right? They're somewhere else. And if you guys aren't speaking the same language, you might end up in that misalignment spot. The other one that you could fall into is the make it pretty trap. This is very common for companies that don't have robust design teams, or they're new to working with design, or they could be a very old company, right? Something that's kind of not innovative and they're kind of stuck in their old ways and things like that. You might fall into this trap, and you'll have to kind of gauge it out once you get into the room to kind of see what they refer to you as. But essentially they look at you as aesthetics, not as problem solvers, which is what we really are. And then lastly, the other trap you can fall into is that your designs never get shipped. You're focused on output instead of the outcome, right? And so we don't want to fall into that one. So I'm gonna go into these a little bit deeper to explain it, but those are the most common ones. So let's start off at the top. We have misaligned priorities. Here, this is the situation where you might get a directive and you'll spend months on a design, and you come back to your manager and you're like, here it is. You're so excited, hand it over, and they're like, great, awesome, thank you. And a week go by and you're like, so where'd it go? Where is it? Is it in the roadmap? Can I see it? And they're like, oh, no, it's in the backlog. And your heart just drops. And you're like, okay, well, when is it coming up? And they're like, it's not a priority right now, right? That will lead you to frustration. It's also, again, very common, so beware if you do run into this situation. But essentially, the struggle here is that if you aren't aligned with the business goals and you go into those meetings and you hand over their designs and they say, all right, great, awesome, that's amazing, but we're focused on this problem right now. And if you would have known, you would have been able to design something that could solve that problem. But without that, you're making assumptions on what it is that the business needs to have solved at that moment in time. So you want to make sure that you get all of the information at the beginning so you aren't designing with assumptions or designing things that get thrown into the backlog, right? And never see the day of light. You don't want to fall into the never ship bucket, but there's a way around that and we're going to go through it. So make sure you get the context first whenever you're given the directive. If they say, hey, we need a checkout flow, you say, all right, well, what is the problem with the existing checkout flow? What's not working about it? What are you trying to see out of this new checkout flow? Is there anything that you particularly like or dislike about the existing checkout flow? Don't just take the directive of, all right, go take a checkout flow and go and do your own thing, right? Make sure you get that context so that you can figure out what the assumptions are or eliminate the assumptions and then come back with something that will actually convert and bring an impact. All right. The make it pretty trap. Usually older companies or new companies will throw you into this bucket, and essentially you're focused on the aesthetics in their eyes. And the reason for this is that you're not speaking the same language, right? Or whenever you're communicating your designs and you're handing them over, you're not conveying the impact that they have. And so this is where, as a designer, it's really important to learn how to present your work. It's very important that you adjust your message to the audience that you're speaking to. So if you're in a meeting with your colleagues and you're getting a design review, right? You might focus on, hey, does it make sense to put this call to action button in the upper right-hand corner, or should I put it at the bottom, right? It's gonna be above the fold and they might see it if they scroll down, but they might not. Like, those are the kind of conversations you might have with your colleagues, right? And they're gonna have very strong opinions on whether or not that button needs to go on the top or needs to go on the bottom. But whenever it comes to presenting your designs to your stakeholders, the people who would be either your manager or above your manager, that's when those conversations are completely irrelevant. They don't care about where you put the button, right? Unless you can say, we put the button above the fold because we noticed when we did research that a lot of users were not seeing the button and therefore they abandoned cart, so we have a drop-off rate of about 30%. But if we move it above the fold, we're gonna test this with a new pool of users and we're hoping that we're gonna see about a 20% increase. That's what we're projecting. That conversation is very different than the conversation that you have with your colleagues. So you need to know how to talk about that. And the only way that you can get to that level is if you do your research, right? And so the big misconception about design is that design and research are separate, right? Sometimes at some companies you have a researcher role and you have a designer role. At some companies, that person is the same. Regardless of what company you step into, you want to either make sure you're working with that person or you're doing your own research to back up your designs. Because when it comes time to present your designs, you want to be able to speak to that level of granularity on the impact and be able to measure it. Because that's what the business side is going to care about. They're not going to care whether or not it's above or below, or it's green or it's red, or it's purple or it's blue. They want to know, how is it going to affect the bottom line? What numbers do you think is going to, come out of this? And have you done your research behind it, right? As long as you can say yes to those things, or you have a counterpart that can say yes to those things and back up your decisions, then you're going to have their attention. If you leave those out of your presentation, you've pretty much given up your seat at the table. They're gonna see you as the make it pretty person, all right? The next one is outputs versus outcomes. So this one, again, kind of goes into the make it pretty, but it's another level beyond that. What you don't want it to turn into is an order taker, right? A lot of times you're gonna receive a directive, they're gonna say, hey, go build this screen or go and fix this feature or blah, blah, blah. You're gonna get your list of things that you have to do and you're gonna go take it away and sit down and do it, right? But you want to make sure, again, that you're not just focused on the outputs, but the outcomes, right? So, hey, I redesigned this screen because I think it's going to convert better based off of X research, right? And make sure that when you're presenting your outcomes, that it's based in what the business is concerned about. So if you know that they're concerned about conversion, whenever you're presenting your designs, make sure you speak on how it's going to affect conversion. If you leave those out, you're just going to be delivering artifacts instead of delivering value to the business. So it's important that you learn how to speak their language so that you can bridge the gap between our world and their world. Remember, at the beginning I said we're the liaison. We have to speak a lot of different languages. Coders, they speak languages in code, right? You got JavaScript, you got CSS, you got, all of those. Those are their languages. Our languages are more vocal, but it's tailored to our audience, actual people, right? That's why our field is so appealing, because we get to work with people. But every person speaks a different language, even though we're all speaking English. So making sure you know what language is going to actually get through to them when you walk in the room, knowing who's in the room. If you're speaking to an executive, you need to keep it really short, concise. They have very limited time. So you need to make sure you get straight to the point and make sure you talk about those outcomes, right? If you're in the room with your colleagues, your managers, then you can be a little bit more open and long-winded and talk about the challenges that you face, and they might be able to help you, right? So just make sure that you're aware of who's in the room and what they care about, and that'll help you tailor your message. All right, so let's go over some key concepts that you just need to know in general. You don't need to go and get an MBA. I did, don't recommend it, but for your own knowledge, let's just kind of go over the things at a high level you need to be aware of. First off, how does your business make money, meaning your employer? Then we're gonna go over some KPIs, key performance metrics, that you need to probably be aware of that are gonna be in most conversations. Then we're gonna talk about market and competition context and how that affects you. And then lastly, trade-offs and constraints. All right, so first things first, you need to know how your company makes money, right? It's not the same, everyone does it differently. And based off of how your company makes money is going to affect how you design in their company, right? So let's start at the top. We have subscriptions. If you're working with a company that makes money through subscriptions like Netflix or Spotify, your goal through your designs is retention. You want to keep them inside the app, you want to keep them engaged, you want to keep them coming back for as long as you can. Right? That's your goal. If we're focused on ads, right? These are like the things that you're gonna see for like a hot second. You're focused on engagement. You want them to stop. You want them to watch it. You want them to share it. You want them to click on it. You have to make sure that it's catchy and very, very quick. You got like less than 2 seconds to grab their attention, right? So your designing is gonna be a little bit different there. Freemium, that's where it's like, hey, try our product for free. Think Dropbox, Canva, right? This is where you're going for conversion. Conversion, you want to convert that person from free to paid, right? So if that's the case, that's where you're going to want to put up maybe some progressive disclosure. If you're not aware of that, progressive disclosure is, hey, you can make it about this far in our product. But if you want to make it that far, you got to pay, right? So get them engaged enough to get them interested and hooked on it, but don't give them the whole pie, right? So freemium, that's where you're gonna be. Little pop-ups and push notifications and toast messages to try and get them to convert. And then lastly, you have your one-time purchase. If this is the case where you're selling like a singular product, then you wanna make sure that your checkout experience is flawless. Like you wanna make it easy to take their money. Right? Like just take it. Like Amazon, you got the one click and it's at your front door. There's no thinking about it. They figured out the whole saving of your payment methods. They figured out the shipping. It all stores in there. It's just look at it and give me your money, right? Super simple. But you can tell that depending on how the business is set up, your priority as a designer is going to change, right? So start here and make sure that you know how your company makes money. Next, here are some big words that you're probably gonna hear in the conversations that you have with your stakeholders. So we'll go through these. KPIs, said it before, key performance metrics. Basically, it's really like very simple in the explanation, but key performance is if something is out and in the open, how is it doing? How is it performing? How do you measure it? What are you supposed to know or look at to see that it's actually performing the way that you wanted it to? Think of it that way. Conversion rate. So conversion rate, that's signing up, buying, or upgrading, right? Conversion also can translate outside of digital context, right? If you think everything that, a situation we've all been familiar with is going to the store, right? You go to the store, as soon as you walk in the store, they have counted that one person is in the store. There's a little threshold there, right? So you walk in the store, you look around, you don't see anything you like. So you turn around and you walk out and they counted you again. That's one person. All right, you walk in the store, different person, and you see something you like, you pick it out and you buy it. And now you walk out the store. They've tracked your transaction on the cash register as one, and they tracked that you left the store. Their conversion rate is 50% because the first person that walked in bought nothing, but the second person that walked in bought something. So out of two, they converted one, 50%. That's conversion rate. Retention, we all know Instagram and TikTok and all of those. It's how long you're staring at something. They measure, I don't know if you guys have seen it, Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. It's a documentary. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend. But on Social Dilemma, they talk about this. And every time you're scrolling, they're counting the milliseconds that you stop and look at something, right? That was 0.2, that was 1 second, that was 3 seconds, right? TikTok runs off of this stuff. Retention is how long you're looking at something and how often you're coming back over time. That's how long can I retain your attention. Churn is how many of the people stop using our product. So if you're in a subscription-based company and you have 100 subscribers, and then all of a sudden, from 1 month to the next, January to February, you have 70 subscribers, your churn rate is 30%. You lost 30 people from month 1 to month 2. So that's your churn, right? Companies want to keep this number obviously as low as they can, right? But whenever you're in those conversations in our world, it's like drop off, right? That's how we would talk about it. But if you hear churn, that's what they mean. Lifetime value. So this is how much a customer is worth to a company over the maximum amount of time that they use a product, right? So let's talk about Netflix. Netflix has subscribers and then, sometimes they'll lose shows and they'll change things and then they lose subscribers and they won't come back, right? They can track the average amount of time that someone is on Netflix. So they might say, we have a seasonal business because we noticed that a lot of people unsubscribe from Netflix in December to go to Hulu or something because maybe they get, Christmas specials or something. Or we're making this up as we go, right? So lifetime value would be, let's assume they just drop off for just December in this example. Lifetime value would be 11 months, right? Netflix has you locked in for 11 months. 12th month, Hulu got you, right? And then you might come back and you'll stay for another 11 months. So your lifetime as a customer on average with Netflix is 11 months. So what the value of that is their subscription price. I think it's like $15.99 or something right now. I don't know. So you take $15.99 and you multiply it times 11 months because that's how long you were with their platform, right? I'm not doing that mental math in my head, but that total is going to be your lifetime value as a customer to Netflix, right? So you want to know on average, like, for example, I get my makeup subscription and I only get it once a month or every 2 months or something. My value as a customer to them is very low, right? Compared to a Netflix where they're getting my money every single month. So understanding what the value of a customer is important. And the reason for that is if you, let's say your company launches a new product, right? And someone comes back to you and they say, all right, to launch this product, it's gonna cost us, for simplicity's sake, $2,000, right? To get everything out the door. And we think we're only gonna see maybe like 30 people use it, and we're only gonna make like $10 off of each person. Well, then it might not be worth that product being made, right? Because the lifetime value of the customer is pretty low. It's only $10. The cost of the product is $2,000. So you, before you even go and design it, would want to know this information, because you could come to your boss, your manager, and say, hey, I don't really think this is a good thing for me to spend 2, 3, 4 months on designing if it's not going to get you the returns that you need as a business. That saves you time, it saves the company time, and now you're seen as a more valuable partner on the team. So that's that one. And then customer acquisition cost. This is how much does it cost to get a new customer? How long do you have to do your marketing to get them in the door and to get them to hand you their money, right? Do you have to hit them with a whole bunch of emails? Do you have to hit them with a whole bunch of ads? Does it take 1 week? Does it take 2 months? Does it take 6 months, right? How long do you have to go, and how much do you have to spend before they actually convert? That's gonna be your customer acquisition cost. How much does it cost to get a new customer? So every business is going to know this all about their users on the business side. You're gonna wanna ask them these questions so you know. You don't necessarily have to go and learn how to do the calculations. They should already know how to do that and have those numbers for you, but you do wanna understand how they got those numbers and how it affects you, right? And how it affects the work that you're doing. All right, moving on to the competition and the context. This is where your researcher becomes very, very important to you, right? You wanna make sure that you know what the competitive landscape looks like for your portion of the market. So if you're in e-commerce, you wanna know all of the other e-commerce people out there and what they're selling to their customers and how they're getting their customers to buy their product versus your product, right? So you need to know everything that you know about your product about theirs too. The reason for that is if you don't know what your competition is doing, then how is yours going to be special or different or better than theirs? You have to study the competition to beat the competition, right? So you always want to keep up to date with their newest features. You always want to know where they're going, or at least try and guess where they're going. That way your product can be different and you can influence people to come to yours versus theirs, right? You don't want to design in a vacuum and be like, oh, I think this product would be really cool. I'm just going to go and design it, and then come to find out the competitor did that and then they made it 10 times better and you didn't even look at it, because you could have used that as a starting point and then went from there, So just beware. It'll save you time. It'll also give you a starting point, and you start your problem solving instead of ground zero up here with everybody else. You don't have to recreate the wheel. A lot of times people are doing the same thing that you're doing. Very few times are you creating something very novel, unless you're like OpenAI. And then we have trade-offs and constraints. There's always, always, always going to be trade-offs and constraints. You just have to find out what they are. And you gotta do that by asking the right questions. And there's usually a teeter-totter that happens here, right? If you want something fast, it's not gonna be good quality. You want a good quality, it's gonna take you a long time to get that. That's usually how this goes. So you wanna be aware of what they are. Some of the common ones are that you're gonna wanna ask questions about are, how many resources do we have to build the solution, right? If you have one dev and you're handing over a monolith of a design and they wanna get this out in 3 months, that might not work, right? And you might have wasted your time, you might have overwhelmed the dev, and you missed your deadline, right? But if you know that, hey, before you get started, we have a timeline of 3 months, which is your constraint. You have one dev, which means you have limited resources, and you have to design a new product. Well, then maybe when you're designing, you're gonna make different choices. You're gonna say, oh, do we really need this feature? No, it's gonna take way too long to design. Nah, let's do this one. This is a lot simpler. All right, you'll make the dev's life a lot easier, and you'll hit your deadline if you know what those challenges are at the beginning, before you get started. right? So make sure you're asking these questions when you're receiving your initiative and your directive. And that's how you become a trusted partner. If they see that you're invested in the business and that you care about the business's timelines and their resources and you're aware of these things, they're gonna rely on you a lot more. And in the world like this, where AI is disrupting every market, you definitely want to make sure that you get a good seat at the table and you're seen as valuable in the companies, right? So this is a way that you can do that in this field. And lastly, let's go to how to ask the right questions. So this is not exhaustive, but these are some of the questions that I think might help you. First, before we figure out what we want to ask, we need to identify who we ask them to, right? Typically, you're gonna see these different seats that are filled in your company. You're gonna have your primary contact, and this is also very common in like the consulting world, right? So you're gonna have your day-to-day person that you interact with on a regular basis. This is the person you see every day. They're communicating the business needs and the challenges. They're telling you how things work. That's your main guy. Then you're gonna have your decision maker. Usually this is not the same person. Your decision maker is gonna be the one who the day-to-day person hands over the results. So the decision maker is gonna look at it and be like, yeah, that looks good. Keep going. Great, let's do that. We'll move in that direction. They're usually not the ones you meet on a daily basis. You might see them like once a week or, every other week or something like that, right? Very limited. And then you have your stakeholder. And this is like your manager's manager, right? Your stakeholder is the one who's like invested in all of the business stuff. You're hardly ever gonna talk to them, but at the end of the day, you gotta make that person happy. This person is supposed to make that person happy. This person's supposed to make that person happy, and you're supposed to make all of them happy. So it's important to make sure that you get straight to the point when you have an opportunity to talk to each of these individuals and you know what questions to ask each of these individuals. Primary contact. Let's start at the bottom. What feedback do you hear most often from users? This is the person that's going to be able to answer that question. They usually are the ones who interact on a daily basis. They're the doers, right? So they know all of the things that drive them crazy about the product that you're building. What is the biggest challenge that you're facing right now with this product? I promise you, they're not going to love it. They're always going to have something to complain about. Ask them to complain to you. You'll learn so much. What features or areas cause the most support requests or complaints? Usually, they'll be able to send you to a focal point, right? There's gonna be 1,000,001 things that they don't like about a product, but you wanna know what is the most important thing? What is the biggest headache out of all the headaches, right? Because that's where you're gonna wanna start. If you can immediately prove that you can provide value to this company, this is how you do it. Start with the biggest headache, and then they're gonna be like, oh my God, this is amazing. Solve the rest of them, you're never leaving. So figure out what is the biggest headache. And then are there any deadlines or milestones I should know about that affect priorities, right? Again, knowing your constraints and your timelines, you have to know this. If you can get something done in a week versus 2 days, you're gonna work very different. Make sure you ask those questions. Level up, decision maker. What metrics are you or your team being measured on? These are those KPIs. Know what they are. They have certain ones that they have to report up to the stakeholder in their quarterly annual meetings. They're gonna have an answer to this. What trade-offs do you usually have to consider when making decisions, right? Again, this is your decision maker. They have a process in their head that's probably not documented anywhere on how they prioritize their decision making. You wanna try and get that out of them. That way you can anticipate what way they're going to sway before you present them with their options, right? And you know how to cater to what they're looking for. How do you prioritize between user experience, technical, feasibility, and business needs? Usually, they have a hierarchy for each of these. If you're talking to someone with a technical background, they're probably gonna be, keep it simple, make sure I can make this quickly. That's top priority for me. We need to make sure we're getting features out the door on a regular basis. But if they have a product background or a design background, they're gonna be like, make it stupid easy. I want this to be like butter going through it, right? And then business needs, if they have a business background, they're gonna care about those KPIs. And then lastly, what features are a non-negotiable, keyword here, for the business and why, right? So basically you need to know, what can I not touch at all, right? right? Like, I'm not even gonna waste my time, because I can't tell you how many times I've worked on something, they're like, yeah, we can't do that. And I'm like, could have told me that, it would have been helpful to know before I spent 2 weeks on this. I'm telling you this because I've made these mistakes myself, and it is terrible. Yeah, they're gonna have reasons for this. Some examples for me are like, hey, that's super complex on the back end, and we don't even know how it works. So it's great what you designed, but if we touch it, it'll break. So we're not gonna touch it. And that's their reason. And it doesn't make sense, but it's out there, So just make sure you know what you can and can't touch. And then lastly, how does this project tie into the company's long-term strategy? Remember, we're talking to the stakeholder now, right? There's a bigger picture that we as designers don't see, right? We're not in those conversations. The stakeholders are looking like at the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year timeline and trying to keep the company on track. You want to know what that is, because you might be able to speed up that timeline. If you can speed up that timeline and do it faster than what this stakeholder thinks you can do, oh, you just made a new best friend, right? So make sure you understand, what is the overall strategy? Where are you trying to go? What would make this project a success in your eyes? This is a good question to ask all of them: decision maker, the stakeholder, and your day-to-day person, because everyone has a different definition of success. So making sure that you know at the highest level what that is very, very important. I would check all the levels. How do you measure ROI, return on investment, for this initiative? So remember when I said, hey, this product's gonna cost $2,000 and we're only gonna make $300 off of the 30 people that use this in this market that are spending $10 on it. That's a negative return on investment. If I spent $2,000 and I'm only getting $300, there's a gap there, right? So we wanna make sure we're on the opposite side of that. If those 30 people are spending $3,000 each, and this product's gonna cost $2,000 to build, well, now we have a good return on investment because we're sitting above the cost that it was to build the product. Does that make sense? And then where do you see the biggest opportunities for growth? Through better design. This is kind of like your cheat code, right? To try and get ahead. They have an idea in their head. They're very far removed from where you're sitting, right? You have all the people in between and you're helping them out. But they know a little something about the business, right? They're just not the ones who are responsible for fixing that. If you can figure out where they think the biggest opportunity is, because remember, they're looking from a bird's eye view. They're looking at that 3, 4, 5 year timeline. They're gonna have an idea of how to grow this company, because ultimately it's their job to do that. So if you know how they are thinking about growing this company, well, now you can help them get there from a more tactical lens, because you're on the ground, you're working with the customers, you're actually designing the thing that's supposed to help the business grow, right? And this person will be able to point you in the right direction of a starting point. You can start brainstorming there and helping them grow the company. Again, your job is to make everyone else above you look great. If you do that, then that's just in general leadership. If you help everyone above you look great, they're gonna take you along with you. All right, and to wrap up, in a nutshell, good design solves user problems, but great design solves user and business problems. Thank you.